Hello and welcome to my first video on the Supreme Sector, which is going to be about the basics of programming, which you can already tell from the title of this video. Anyone who's interested in learning how to code but have no idea where to start can use this video as an introduction, which will hopefully give beginners a solid foundation on how to program. I'll go over some basic coding terminology as well as demonstrate some examples using this programming environment provided by Khan Academy. So the first thing I'm going to go over are functions, which are basically commands that tell your computer what to do. For example, if I want my computer to draw an ellipse on the canvas at the right, I need a special function that is built to do just that. To use or call this ellipse drawing function, I typed ellipse followed by a set of parentheses to denote that this is a function, and I end the line with a semicolon. The only problem is just telling the computer to draw an ellipse is not enough. I need to be more specific and tell the computer where to draw the ellipse and how big to draw it. To do that, I've added numbers into the set of parentheses, which are called parameters. The first parameter is the x-coordinate of the center of the ellipse. The second is the y-coordinate. The third parameter says how wide the ellipse should be, and the fourth says how tall it should be. Also take note that the origin starts at the top left corner of the canvas, so the x-coordinate will increase as you move right, and the y-coordinate will increase as you move down. The units for these parameters are pixels, and this particular canvas is 400 by 400, so placing the ellipse at 200, 200 puts it right at the center. I can also call the ellipse function multiple times to draw multiple ellipses as shown here. You may notice that the second ellipse covers the first, and this is because of the order in which I drew these ellipses. You could think of each ellipse as having its own layer. When I drew the first ellipse, a layer containing that ellipse was laid down on the canvas, and then when I drew the second ellipse, a second layer containing that second ellipse was laid on top of that, and that's why in the overlapping region, the second ellipse covers the first. If I want the other ellipse to be on top, I just need to swap the order of these two lines. I've drawn 3 circles here, all of which are concentric, meaning that they have the same center. But notice that in the code, all the x-coordinates are the same and all the y-coordinates are the same. And instead of typing these numbers repeatedly, we can use variables. Now variables store values, and when used later in the program, they will essentially represent the value that has been assigned to it. For example, since all the x-coordinates are the same, I can create a variable that represents the x-coordinate of all the circles. So I've created this variable by starting with the keyword var, followed by the variable name, in this case x, followed by equal sign, which is the assignment operator, followed by the value that this variable should represent, in this case 200. And you can interpret this line as the value 200 being assigned to the variable x. And of course, all the y-coordinates are the same, and so I can create a y variable to represent the y-coordinate of all the circles. So to use the variable, I've basically replaced all the numbers with the variable name. So whenever the computer sees x, it knows that it is a variable that represents 200, and it will use that value to position the circles, and the same goes for the y. What's really helpful is that if I wanted to move all these circles to a different coordinate, instead of having to go to each function call and manually change the parameter, all I have to do is change a variable up here. So if I wanted to move these circles up, I just need to decrease the y coordinate just like that. So far, all the shapes that we've been drawing have been black and white, so let's add colors to them. We can use the fill function, which will set a specific color, which will fill all the shapes that are drawn later in the program. So I've called the fill function here with 3 parameters to specify the color. These parameters represent the amounts of red, green, and blue respectively, and they range from 0 to 255. This set of parameters, 255, 0, is the RGB color code for red, and this makes all the circles that are drawn afterwards to be colored red. I can call the fill function multiple times to change the fill color for each ellipse. And then if I want to add a background color, I can call the background function with the RGB parameters. Now, suppose I wanted a whole row of 15 circles to be drawn across the canvas. I could call the ellipse function 15 times, but that would take too long. This is where a for loop would become useful. For loops basically use a counter variable to keep track of the number of loops that have occurred, and during each loop I can have a certain piece of code be executed repeatedly. So I've created a for loop setup here, starting with the word for, and then in parentheses there are 3 statements, and it's worth pausing for a moment to discuss what statements are. Basically, a statement is a unit of code that expresses a certain action that is to be done by your computer. For example, a declaration statement tells your computer to create a variable, and a call statement tells your computer to, well, call a function. And there are many other types of statements, but I'm not going to get into those because I want to continue on with for loops. The 3 statements that control the for loop are separated by semicolons. The first statement is a declaration statement, which creates the counter variable I and initiates it with the value of 1. This is executed once right before the for loop begins. The second statement is a conditional statement, which is evaluated before each loop begins. If true, then the loop proceeds. If false, then the for loop ends. And the final statement is run after each loop. So here I++ just means increase the counter variable I by 1. And finally, the code that is inside these braces is executed during each loop. So here I'm drawing a circle during each loop, but the problem is that all the circles are in the exact same place, and I need each successive circle to have a bigger x coordinate than the previous in order to have a full row of circles. Since during each loop the counter variable is increasing, we can use that counter variable to determine how far right each circle should be drawn. So if we use I as the x coordinate for each circle, then the circles do separate, but they're still too close to each other. So in order to add more spacing, we can multiply this I value with some number, let's say 20. And just like that, we have 15 circles all in a row. Similar to a for loop, we can use a while loop to draw the row of circles as we did before. In a while loop, the code inside the braces is executed repeatedly as long as the conditional statement inside the parentheses is evaluated to be true. I'm not going to go through this example in much detail, but pause the video and see if you can understand what's happening here. Now let's talk about having your program make decisions based on certain conditions. Here I have a circle which I want to color depending on the temperature variable here. If the temperature is greater than 80, I want the circle to be red. If it is less than 40, I want it to be blue. And if it is anything in between, I want it to be green. Here's where I can use if-else statements to determine the appropriate fill color based on the temperature variable. So here I've constructed an if-else statement which should seem intuitive. Basically, if the condition inside the parentheses is true, then the code in the braces is executed, and if not, then the program just moves on. And so first we see if the temperature is greater than 80, then the fill color is set to red. If it's not, then we see if the temperature is less than 40. If it is, then we set the fill color to blue. And if it's neither greater than 80 nor less than 40, then we set the fill color to green. So in this particular case, the temperature is set to 70. So 70 is not greater than 80, nor is it less than 40, and therefore the else statement is executed and the fill color is set to green, and so we have a green circle.